One might argue that if Sorel had gone to bed that night the way a sensible queen ought to, she would never have heard a single word, and she might be sleeping under the black slate roofs of Caldmore to this very day. But then again, if the Alpha King had learned to guard his tongue half as well as he guarded his borders, there would have been nothing worth overhearing at all. So if a person wished to be strictly fair about the matter, and Sorel would later decide that a person did, then the whole cold ruin of it belonged to him. Every frozen mile of what came after. She had been queen of Caldmore for a year, and in all that time she had never once felt like anything but a clause in a treaty. That was the honest shape of it. The pact between Ostrand and Caldmore had needed a seal, and a seal was a living thing with a heartbeat. And the heartbeat they chose was hers. She had crossed the mountains at 17 with a chest of borrowed finery and a bond she had not asked for humming under her ribs, and she had spent every day since trying to earn a place that had only ever been rented to her. The court called her the snow bride behind their hands because she came from the cold north and because she did not thaw the way they wanted her to, so she learned their customs instead. She learned which lords to flatter and which to simply outlast. She sat each night beside a husband who spoke to her with flawless courtesy and never once with warmth, and told herself courtesy was a kind of beginning. A woman could build on courtesy, she thought. Given time, given a reason. There had been signs enough if she had wished to read them. The seamstresses who cut her gowns a season behind the fashion and smiled when she noticed. The council that fell silent the moment she entered and took its business up again when the door closed, as though she were a draft to be waited out. The name in the corridors, the Snow Bride, always spoken just loud enough to carry and always denied to her face. She had gathered up each small slight and told herself none of it came from him. His courtesy, at least, had never wavered. She had made that courtesy into a whole cathedral of hope, and knelt in it every night for a year. She should have known better than to go looking for the reason. That night the great hall had been full of a foreign delegation, silks the color of wine and old gold, envoys from the river cities who laughed too easily and watched too closely. Sorel had played her part through the whole long feast, smiling until her face ached, and when Corvin rose and left the hall without a word to her, she did the one thing she had trained herself never to do. She followed him. She told herself it was duty. A king did not vanish from his own feast without a queen wondering why. But under the duty was the small starved thing she tried never to feed, the part of her that wanted just once to catch him alone and see if the courtesy might crack into something a person could actually hold. The corridor behind the hall was cold and half dark, the torches guttering low in their brackets. Voices came from the map room, the door standing open a hand's width, lamplight falling gold across the flagstones. She knew his voice at once. She would have known it in her sleep. The bond knew it before she did, tightening sweet and traitorous in her chest. The other voice was a woman's. Low, amused, foreign. One of the river envoys. Sorel had seen her at the feast, seated near the salt, a slender woman named Vesna with black hair oiled to a shine and eyes that missed nothing in a room. Sorel stopped where she was. She did not mean to listen. She only meant to wait until the moment was decent enough to knock. And then she heard her own name in her husband's mouth, and the shape of it was wrong. The Snow Bride, Corvin was saying, and there was a laziness in it, a boredom she had never once heard him aim at her face. You may put the thought out of your head entirely. She is a signature, nothing more. A cold clause in a colder document. I feel no more for her than I feel for the ink that dried the treaty. Vesna laughed, soft and pleased. And here the whole court swears the Alpha King is bewitched by his little northern wife. Let the court swear what it likes, he said. The court is paid to believe pretty things. I married Ostrand, not the girl. When she has given me what the pact requires of her, she may go back to her mountains and her fog, and I will not so much as notice the draft when the door shuts behind her. Vesna's voice dropped then. Silk laid over a blade. Then you will not object, she said. If certain arrangements were made to hasten that door along, a treaty can always be resealed with fresher wax. There are houses that would pay a great deal to see the North change hands, and a widowed king is a far more useful thing to them than a wedded one. I object to nothing that serves the crown, Corvin said, and his voice stayed perfectly, terribly even. Do what you came here to do. I stopped counting the cost of her a long time ago. Something in Sorrel went very quiet and very cold, the way a pond goes still under the first hard freeze. She had spent a year telling herself that his silence was patience, that his courtesy was a slow road to something warmer waiting at the end of it. And here was the truth, handed to a stranger in a dark room as easily as a man hands over an empty cup. She was ink. She was a draft under a door. She should have gone then. Any sensible woman would have gone. But she stood one heartbeat too long, and in that heartbeat she saw the strangest thing of all. She saw him glance at the door. It was quick. So quick she would spend the coming weeks telling herself she had imagined it. But the Alpha King of Caldmore, in the very middle of calling his wife a smear of dried ink, turned his pale eyes toward the gap in the door where she stood in the dark, and for the space of a single breath he looked straight at her, as though he had known she was standing there all along. Then he looked away and said something else, something crueler, and Vesna laughed again, and Sorrel was already moving, already gone from the doorway before her mind could catch up to the question her body had no time to ask. Why would a man who felt nothing at all have taken such care to make certain she heard every word? She did not remember the walk back to her chambers. One moment she was in the cold corridor with her husband's voice still curdling in her ears, and the next she was standing in the middle of her own rooms with no memory of the stairs between, breathing as though she had run the whole way up them. Marin found her like that. Marin had dressed her hair that very evening, a girl of the Caldmore lowlands with quick hands and quicker eyes, the nearest thing to a friend Sorrel had made in a year of careful strangers. She took one look at the Queen's face and set down the ewer she was carrying. "My lady," she said. "What happened? Who did this to you?" "Nobody," Sorrel said. Her own voice sounded far away, as though it belonged to some other woman across the room. "Nobody did anything at all. That is rather the whole of it." Marin did not believe her. She crossed the room and took the Queen's cold hands the way a person takes the hands of someone standing too near a ledge. "You are shaking," she said, "and you will not tell me why. And I have watched you swallow a whole year of this court without a flinch. So whatever this is, it is not nothing." Sorrel understood that she was about to lose this too, this one small, ordinary warmth. "I heard him," she said at last. "I heard exactly what I am to him. It turns out I am a piece of furniture that knows how to sign its own name." She had been raised in Ostran to understand a mate bond the way other children understood their letters. It was the first lore the old folk taught, that the bond was a road worn slowly between two souls, and that a road left open only deepened with use, and a road deepened past a certain point could never afterward be unmade. For a year she had kept her end of that road open like a fool, swept and waiting, hoping he might one day walk down it toward her. Now she understood that she had been the only one ever standing in the road, so she would close it. She would close it and she would leave. And she would do both before the sun came up, because if she waited for the morning she would have to look at his flawless, courteous face across the breakfast table, and she did not think she could survive being called ink twice in as many days. "You cannot simply go," Marin whispered, even as she was already pulling a plain traveling cloak from the press, already betraying every rule of the household with her hands while her mouth pretended to argue against it. "He is the Alpha King. There are guards on every gate. There is the bond. He will feel you leave. He will feel it the very moment you cross the wards." "Not if I close it," Sorrel said. Marin went still. "That hurts," she said quietly. "Everyone knows it hurts. Closing a living bond by force, my lady, it is not a small thing to do to yourself." "So does staying," Sorrel said, "and only one of the two lets me keep my pride." Closing the bond was worse than Morin had promised. Sorrel sat on the edge of the bed and did it the way the old folk had taught her, gathering the warm, living thread of him hand over hand, folding it into the smallest shape it would go, and sealing it away behind her ribs where it could no longer reach him and he could no longer reach her. It felt like setting a bone that had never been broken. When it was done, there was a silence in her she had not carried since she was a girl, a hollow where a warm voice used to live, and she breathed through it until she trusted her legs. And then she stood. She went down through the kitchen stairs the way the scullery girls did, hood up, the sealed bond a cold stone behind her breastbone where the warmth had lived for a year. It cost her more than she let her face show. Every step away from him pulled at the closed place like a stitch straining against the pull, and she set her teeth and kept walking anyway. In the lower courtyard she stopped once, pressed flat to the cold wall, because there were men there who had no business being awake at such an hour. Not the night watch. She knew the watch. These were the river envoy's people, 3 of them, cloaked and quiet, and one of them was handing a sealed packet up to a rider whose horse was already saddled and pointed north. North. Toward the mountains. Toward Ostran. Toward home. Sorrel filed it away without knowing why, the way a soldier files the shape of a thing that will matter later, and then the rider was through the postern and gone into the dark, and she made herself keep moving before her nerve could fail her. The eastern gate let her out with the dawn carts, a cloaked woman on a plain horse among the charcoal men and the fishwives, and no one looked twice at the snow bride, because no one in Caldmore had ever truly looked at her at all. That, at least, she could finally put to use. By the time the sun came up gray over the black roofs of the city, Sorrel was a full mile past the last wall, riding hard for the high passes, and the queen, the court had never bothered to know, was simply gone. Corvin woke at dawn to a cold he could not name. He lay a moment in the gray light and did not understand it, the wrongness of it, the silence where something warm had always been. Then he understood it all at once and sat up as though struck. One hand pressed flat to his own chest, to the sealed and empty place where a warm and stubborn road had run for a year without his ever thanking her for keeping it. He did not shout. He did not wake the household. A lesser man might have. Instead, the Alpha King of Caldmore rose in the cold and crossed to the locked drawer of his writing desk, and his hands were not quite steady as he opened it, and for a long moment he looked at the thing inside that no one in his court had ever once been allowed to see. Then he lifted his head toward the north, toward the mountains, toward the road she would take, and the look on his face was not the look of a man who had gotten what he wanted. It was the face of a man watching a plan go exactly right, and understanding far too late what it would cost him when it did. "Wake my riders," he said into the empty room, "and bring me the map of the Ostran passes, every last one of them." Ostran took her back the way the cold takes a traveler, without ceremony and without mercy, simply folding her into itself as though she had never once left it. She came up through the high passes on the second day, the mountains closing gray and familiar around her, and something in her chest that had been clenched tight for a year began, strangely, to ache instead of merely hurt. This was the country that had made her. Pine and black rock, and a wind with teeth in it. She had been so young when they sent her south. She had told herself for a year that she did not miss any of it. She had been lying, the way she lied about most things that might one day be used against her. The hold of Ostran sat where it had always sat, a fortress of dark stone grown out of the mountainside like a thing that had decided long ago to be a mountain itself. And in the gate yard, before she had even swung down from the saddle, there was Emmerich. He was older than she remembered, his beard gone fully to iron, but he crossed the yard toward her with the same long stride she had trailed behind as a child, and when he took her frozen hands in his, it was the first warm thing she had felt in more days than she cared to count. "Little wolf," he said, which was what he had called her since she was small enough to ride on his shoulders through the hall. Emmerich had been regent of Ostran since before she could walk, the man who had held the whole hold together through her father's long dying and her own green years after, the man who had looked at a half-wild orphan girl and decided she was worth the teaching. He had put her first blade in her hand. He had stood at the gate and not wept, or pretended not to, on the morning they sent her south to be a treaty. "Look at you," he said now, holding her out at arm's length to see the whole of her. "They have made you thin, and they have made you sad. I should very much like to know which of them to kill for it." "And God's help her." Sorrel laughed, the first true laugh in longer than she could name, and felt something unlock in her chest that Caldmore had kept bolted shut for a year. For the first time since the corridor, she did not feel like a document that had been signed and set aside. She felt like a person someone had been glad to see come home. He fed her. He sat her by a fire that actually roared instead of the polite southern embers she had learned to shiver beside, and he let her be quiet until she was ready to stop being quiet. And then, gently, he drew the whole miserable story out of her. The corridor, the open door, the ink and the draft, and the stranger's soft, pleased laughter. Emmerich listened without a single word, and his face as he listened moved from grief to something harder and colder. And to Sorrel it was deeply comforting, because it was the exact shape of the fury she had not yet let herself feel. "He was never worthy of you," Emmerich said at last, low and certain. "I said as much the day they took you from this hall. A cold southern king who marries a treaty and then insults it in the dark to a stranger. I told your father that alliance would cost us far more than it ever bought us. I only ever regretted that it was you who would pay the price of it." "You told me to go," Sorrel said softly. "You told me it was my duty to go." "Because it was," he said. "And because I was a coward who chose the hold over the child in front of me." He looked into the fire for a long moment. "I have had a year to be ashamed of that choice. Let me be something better than ashamed now that you are finally home. Let me keep you here, in the one place on this earth where no one will ever again dare to call you ink." It was everything she had needed to hear. That was the part she would remember afterward, when everything had turned over and shown its other face. That it was exactly, precisely what she had needed to hear, and that it was delivered by the one man in all the world she had never once thought to doubt. Only later, lying in the narrow, cold bed of her girlhood, with the wind singing in the old stones, did the small, trained part of her that never fully slept turn something over and frown at it in the dark. A rider had reached Ostran before her. She had ridden hard, changed horses twice, arrived gray to the lips with exhaustion, and yet Emmerich's welcome had been waiting and ready. The fires banked just so, her old room aired out. A place laid for her at the high board as though her coming had been known for days. Someone had sent word ahead of her, faster than she herself had been able to travel, and the only riders she had watched leave Caldmore that night pointed north had been the river envoy's men, passing a sealed packet up to a horse already turned toward the mountains, toward Ostran. She told herself it meant nothing at all. She was tired and heartsore, and seeing dark shapes and shadows the way frightened people always do. She closed her eyes and reached for sleep. She had very nearly found it when the horns began. They were the deep horns, the wall horns, the ones Ostran sounded only for an army or a king. Sorrel was on her feet with her heart slamming before she was fully awake, at the arrow slit, staring down through the blue dark of the small hours at the road below the gate. There were riders on it. A hard, spare company under a black banner she knew better than she knew her own name. Come up through passes that should by every right have stopped them, arrived faster than any grieving husband had the least right to arrive. and at the head of them, bareheaded in the killing cold, his pale eyes already turned up toward the very window where she stood, as though the bond she had sealed shut still whispered him exactly where to look, was the Alpha King of Caldmore. Corvin had come for his runaway queen, and Sorrel understood, with a sick lurch of pure disbelief, that he had not come alone, and he had not come quietly, and whatever it was he wanted from her, he plainly did not intend to leave these mountains without it. Sorrel dressed in the dark with hands that would not quite obey her, and by the time she came down into the great hall, the whole hold had woken. Torches, boots on stone. Emmerich already up on the dais with a fur thrown over his nightclothes, iron-faced, and around him the household guard in a loose, uncertain ring, because no one yet knew whether they were about to fight the Alpha King of Caldmore or bow to him. Corvin made the choice easy. He came through the great doors alone, his hard company left out in the cold of the yard, no blade drawn and no man at his shoulder. Sorrel hated that she understood at once what it was, the oldest kind of power, the kind that does not need to raise its voice. He crossed the flagstones unhurried, snow still melting on his black cloak, and did not so much as glance at Emmerich on the high dais. He looked at her. "Wife," he said. The word landed in the silent hall like a stone dropped down a deep well. Sorrel felt every eye in Ostrand swing to her and then back to him. She lifted her chin, because it was the only thing she could think of to lift. "I am no wife of yours," she said. "You told a stranger exactly as much yourself. Or do you not remember the map room?" "I remember it very well. I remember every single word." Something moved behind his pale eyes, quick and gone. "Ah," he said softly. "So you did hear." Emmerich came down off the dais then. One careful step, spreading his hands in the gesture of a host who means to seem reasonable while giving away nothing. "Your Majesty honors us," he said, in the voice he kept for envoys and creditors. "But you arrive under arms in the dead of night at the gate of a sovereign hold. You frighten my people, and you name a woman wife who rode all this way to be free of you. Ostrand is not Caldmore. Here a bond flown from is a bond ended. The girl is home. Take your riders and your grievance and go, and we will call it a private matter between houses." It was smoothly done, and Sorrel felt a rush of gratitude toward the old man. She watched Corvin to see it strike home. It did not. He smiled, and it was not a pleasant thing to watch, because it was the smile of a man who had been waiting all night for exactly that speech. "A bond flown from is a bond ended," he repeated. "In Ostrand. Yes. I have been reading your laws of late, Regent, more closely than you might care for. And your oldest law is very clear that a mate bond, once sealed between two wolves, cannot be cut by the flight of one party alone. It requires the severance right. Both souls beneath a single roof, one full turn of the moon, until the bond is cut clean before witnesses by both hands together. Anything less, and the bond stands. And so does the alliance it seals. And so does every claim I hold upon this hold as the husband of its daughter." The silence in the hall changed its shape entirely. Emmerich's face did not move. But Sorrel, who had known that face her whole life, saw the small tightening at the corner of his jaw, and did not understand it. He should have been angry. He was something else instead. He was caught. "You cannot mean to invoke the right," Emmerich said. "I mean exactly that," said Corvin. "One turn of the moon, and the bond severed lawfully before the whole assembled hold, her hand in mine, so that no soul alive may ever say the snow bride was cast off, or stolen, or shamed. When it is ash, I ride home and never trouble her again." He inclined his head, courteous as ever, hateful as ever. "Unless the good regent would sooner I took my wife and rode out with her tonight. I am content either way. Choose." "Choose," he had said, as though there were truly a choice in it. Emmerich could not deny a king the plain letter of his own hall's law, not without every lesser house in the north hearing that Ostrand kept its ancient laws only when they suited it. Sorrel watched him understand it, and fold the anger away behind the reasonable face, and bow 1 stiff degree. The right, then, Emmerich said. 1 turn of the moon, and not 1 hour beyond it. Sorrel had stood silent through the whole of it, passed back and forth between the two men like a deed being haggled over, and something in her finally boiled past her control. "Does no one in this hall mean to ask me?" she said, and her voice cut clean across the cold air. "I sealed this bond with my own mouth, and I will thank you both to remember whose bond it is you are trading over the top of my head." For the first time, Corvin looked at her without the smile. Only looked. And to her fury, it was the map room glance all over again, that same swift, unreadable thing, as though he were making certain she was still there and still whole. "You are right," he said quietly. "It is your bond. So I will ask you, and no one else. Will you grant me the right, Sorrel? 1 turn of the moon under your own roof, on your own ground, ringed round by your own people who love you. Or would you sooner I stayed your husband forever?" Put that way, it was no choice at all. And he knew it. She hated that he knew it. "Stay your month," she said through her teeth. "Cut your bond, and then get out of my mountains." "Done," said the Alpha King of Caldmore. And he looked, for one strange instant, almost relieved. They gave him the East Tower, as far from her rooms as the hold could manage, and the household went uneasily back to its beds. Sorrel did not go to hers. She stood in the emptied hall, staring at the doors he had come through, trying to make the pieces lie flat, and failing. She did not hear him come back. For so large a man he moved like weather. One moment she was alone, and the next his low voice was behind her. "You closed the bond well," he said. "I felt it go. It was the cleanest severing I have ever felt, and it nearly put me on the floor. You were always better at this than they gave you credit for." She turned on him. "Do not," she said. "Do not stand in my home and hand me kindness now. I heard what I am to you." "I know what you heard," he said. "And I will not argue it tonight. You would not believe me, and you would be right not to." He came 1 step closer, his voice dropping, every trace of the lazy court boredom gone out of it. There was only something urgent and quiet left. "But hear this much, Sorrel, and hear it as a soldier and not as a wife. Whatever else you come to believe of me before this moon is out, do not trust the safety of these walls. Do not eat what you have not watched poured. Do not walk the yard alone after dark. And whatever kind hand reaches for you inside this hold, however long you have known it, look very hard at what it is holding before you take hold of it." Cold went down her spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "These are my people." "I am saying," he said, "that you rode out of one danger and straight into a far worse one, and you did it because I made you, and it is the single worst thing I have ever done." Then his eyes flicked past her shoulder to the dark mouth of the corridor, to a shadow that had just peeled itself from the wall there, and his whole body changed, and he said, very pleasantly and very loudly, "Good night, wife," as though he had said nothing else at all. The severance rite, it turned out, had rules, and the rules were a daily torment. Ostrin's oldest law did not merely require the 2 parties under one roof. It required them witness together at the raising and the lowering of each day, so that no one could ever afterward claim the right had been shirked. So every dawn, Sorrel had to stand in the cold hall beside the very husband she was unmaking, while an old rite keeper murmured the words over them, and every dusk the same again. And in between, she had a whole hold to run and a month to survive, and a man underfoot, who would not behave the way a man who feels nothing was supposed to behave. He did not sulk. He did not press her. He did not, God's help her, mention the map room even once. He simply made himself quietly, infuriatingly useful. He was out in the yard at first light with the guard, and the guard, who had come fully prepared to loathe him, did not manage it. He found that the granary tallies did not add up, and said so, mildly, to no one in particular. And Sorrel filed that away too, because she had thought the very same thing for a year and had never once been able to prove it. He was patient with the old servants and short with the proud ones, and he watched everything with those pale, unhurried eyes. More than once she caught him watching Emmerich's own men in a way that was not idle in the least. "You are staring," she told him on the fourth day, in the armory yard, where she had come to work the temper out of herself against a Pell, and found him already there ahead of her, sleeves shoved back, splitting kindling he had no earthly reason to be splitting. "I am," he agreed, not stopping the axe. "You are very good with that blade. Someone taught you well. Emmerich taught me." Corvin's axe paused for half a beat and then came down again. "Did he?" he said. "How very fortunate for you." There it was again, that flatness beneath the courtesy, aimed this time not at her, but at the old man's name. Sorrel lowered her sword. "Why do you say it like that?" she demanded. "You keep saying his name as though it tastes of something gone off." "Do I?" said Corvin. "Only habit. Forgive me." And he smiled the court smile, the ink smile, the one that closed a door gently in her face, and bent and picked up another log. She could have screamed at him. Instead, she went back to the Pell and hid it until her arms shook and her breath tore, and told herself she did not care in the slightest what the Alpha King thought of the man who had raised her out of nothing. What she noticed, and hated noticing, was that Emmerich watched them too. Not the way a fond old man watches a daughter home from a bad marriage. He watched the way a man watches a door he has left unlocked by mistake. When Corvin asked, idle as anything, who held the keys to the granary and the strong room now the old steward had died, Emmerich answered smoothly and turned the talk elsewhere. And that evening, 2 of his sworn men were set to stand the granary door who had never stood it before. Sorrel told herself it was only an old regent bristling at a younger king in his hall. She was becoming, she noticed, very practiced at telling herself things. It came on the 9th night, and it came for her. She had not meant to walk the yard alone after dark. She had meant to do precisely as he had told her, which galled her more than she could say, and she had lasted 8 nights on spite alone. But on the 9th, a message came up that the East Watchtower had gone dark and unanswered, and she was second to no one in her own hold, and old habit carried her out across the black yard toward the tower stair before her mind had finished forming. The thought that a dark tower and a silent watch were exactly the shape a trap makes. She understood it at the very foot of the stair. Too quiet. No frost crunch of a sentry shifting his weight on the boards above. The wrongness climbed her spine, and she had her blade half drawn when the first of them came out of the stairwell dark and put a knife precisely where her throat had been a breath before. She was fast. She had always been fast. She caught his wrist and turned it hard and heard him grunt and drove her knee up into him, but there were 2 more behind him, and this was no drunken tavern brawl. This was quiet and trained and certain, faces wrapped in dark cloth, the 3 of them moving to pin her against the wall, the way you move against someone you have been paid in full to be rid of. One of them said, low and flat, "Quickly now, we only need to be sure of her." And Sorrel understood with a sick lurch that they did not mean to rob her or frighten her off. They meant to finish her, and to carry back proof that it was done. She got her back to the wall and her blade up, and she thought, with a strange, cold clarity, that she might truly die tonight in the yard of the hold she had been born in. And then, the dark to her left came apart. Corvin hit them like the mountain itself falling. She had never in her life seen anything like it. He had no blade drawn either. He simply took the nearest man by the back of the neck and put him into the stone wall with a sound she felt in her own teeth, and turned, and the second man's knife opened a long line across the king's bared forearm, and the king did not so much as slow for it. He caught the third one's wrist as it drove again for Sorrel, and Sorrel put her own blade home under the man's guard, and then it was only the two of them left breathing hard in the dark over three fallen shapes, and Corvin's blood ran black in the starlight down his hand and dripped steadily onto the frozen ground. "You are hurt," she said stupidly. "I have had far worse from politer people," he said. "Are you whole? Sorrel, look at me. Are you whole?" And his hands came up to her face, both of them, cold and shaking very slightly, turning her head to the moonlight to check her for wounds with a care that no man who felt nothing at all for a woman had the least business feeling. Sorrel stood in the wreckage of the night with her heart slamming against her ribs, and felt the sealed place behind them give one hard, traitorous throb toward him before she could smother it. He would not let her raise the hold. That was the first strange thing. "No alarm," he said, low and fast, already dragging the fallen men back into the deeper shadow of the tower. "No bell. No word to anyone at all. Not tonight. Not until we know more." "Know what?" she hissed. "3 men just tried to cut me down in my own yard. My people will want an answer for it." "Your people," said Corvin, crouching over the nearest body and going through it with quick, sure hands. He came up with something small and went very still, and then he held it out to her flat on his bloodied palm so that the starlight could catch it. It was a token. A little iron token, stamped with a mark that Sorrel had known her whole life, had worn herself as a girl, the mark carried by every man sworn personally and by oath to the regent of Ostrand. "These are your people," Corvin said very quietly. "That, my lady, is rather the whole of the trouble." Sorrel did not believe it. She would not let herself believe it. She lay awake the rest of that night with the iron token cold in her closed fist, and told herself all the things a person tells themselves in the dark. That a token can be stolen off a dead man. That a mark can be forged in an afternoon by anyone with a hammer. That her enemies, and a queen, even a rented one, collected enemies, might want nothing in this world so much as to turn her against the one man who had never once failed her. Emmerich had held her when she was small enough to carry. Emmerich had wept, or very nearly, at the gate. Emmerich had said, "Let me keep you here, where no one will ever call you ink again. You did not stamp your own iron onto the men you sent against the child you raised." It was too stupid a thing to be true. It was so stupid that it had to be a frame laid by someone who wanted her looking the wrong way. She told Corvin exactly that in the morning, low and fierce, under cover of the Right-Keeper's murmured words, and Corvin did not argue with her. That was the maddening thing about him. He only listened, and inclined his head and said, "Perhaps you are right. Watch then and decide the matter for yourself. I would far rather you saw it with your own eyes than took my word for any of it. I have not earned your word." And so she watched. She had meant to watch him, to catch the king out in his lie, to prove the iron token was his invention and not her old man's guilt. Instead, she found herself watching all of it, the whole hold, with the cold, trained eye that Emmerich himself had ground into her across a childhood. And she did not much like everything the eye kept bringing back to her. The trouble was that the watching kept turning into something else entirely. She would set herself to study him for a lie and instead catch herself studying the line of his throat when he tipped his head back to laugh at something one of the stable boys had said. She would resolve to mark every false note in his courtesy, and instead notice that the courtesy fell away completely when he thought no one was watching him. That the real man left underneath it was drier and quieter and far more tired than the polished king the whole court had been sold. He brought her no cups of cocoa out on the cold walls. He made her no pretty speeches over dinner. He simply began, somewhere in the middle of that long, strange month, to talk to her the way a person talks to someone they have privately decided is worth the truth, in low, even sentences with all the performance stripped clean out of them, and it undid her far worse than any flattery in the world could have. Marin saw it before Sorrel would say it aloud. The girl had come north in the same wagon train that carried the king, and she dressed Sorrel's hair each night the way she always had. One evening she met Sorrel's eyes in the polished steel mirror and said, plainly, "You look at him now, the way you used to look at the door he came through." "I am watching him for a lie," Sorrel said. "Of course," said Marin, drawing the comb through her hair, not troubling to hide her small knowing smile. "That is surely all it is." And Sorrel sat very still under the girl's quick hands and understood, with a sinking heart, that if Marin could read it plain in a mirror, the whole hold could read it too, and one of them was almost certainly still trying to see her gone. And the bond would not stay sealed. That was the part she told no one, not even Marin. She had drowned it. She had folded it small and buried it behind her ribs with her own 2 hands, and every day he spent beneath her roof, it strained against the seal like a live thing that had scented open air. When he stood too near her at the dawn rite, she could feel it press and ache. When his bandaged arm, the arm he had opened saving her life, brushed against hers by accident at the board, the seal thinned to almost nothing and warmth leaked through it, and she had to grip the edge of the bench to keep her face still and cold. She was unmaking this bond by law, one witness dawn at a time, and her own traitor heart was laboring to knit it back together in every hour that fell between. It came to a head on the cold edge of the second week, in the corridor outside the Rite Hall, the 2 of them alone, the last torch guttering low in its bracket. He had said something to her. She could never afterward remember what, only that it had been true and unguarded and had reached straight past a year of her careful armor, and she had turned to answer him and found him nearer than she had thought, and the answer had simply died in her throat. They stood too close together in the failing light. His pale eyes moved over her face, unhurried, the way they always did, and for once he did not trouble to hide what was in them, and what was in them was not the boredom of a man who feels nothing at all. "Sorrel," he said, low, and it was not the court voice. It was a voice she had never once heard him use, and it went straight through the seal like a blade through wet paper. For a single unbearable instant the bond flew wide open. She had sealed it shut against him. She had drowned it with her own hands. And still it tore wide for the length of one heartbeat. And in that one heartbeat she felt him, the whole of him. Everything the mockery in the map room had sworn was empty. And it was not empty. It was flooded. It was a wanting so old and so deep and so carefully buried, that feeling it was like laying her bare hand on a fire she had been told for a year was stone cold. He wanted her. He had always wanted her. And underneath the wanting, tangled all the way through it, was a fear so sharp it stole the breath out of her, a fear that had nothing to do with wanting her and everything to do with keeping her alive. Then the seal slammed shut again, and Corvin stepped back from her as though she had struck him across the face, his own face gone white and stricken with the knowledge of exactly what she had just felt in him. And Sorrel stood alone in the guttering torchlight with her whole understanding of the last long year coming quietly apart in her hands, and could not force out a single word. She did not sleep that night. She had felt the truth of him with her own soul, and it did not match a single word he had said in the map room, and the not matching would not let her rest. She found him before the dawn rite, in the cold gray hall, alone. He was standing at the great hearth with his back to her, and he did not turn, though she knew he felt her come in, because the bond had not fully sealed again since the corridor, and it never would now. It hummed between them, thin and stubborn and awake. "You lied to Vesna," she said to his back, in the map room. Every word of it was a lie. His shoulders moved, a breath let out slow. "Yes," he said. "Why?" "I cannot tell you why. Not yet." He turned then, and his face was bare of every mask she had ever seen him wear. "I can tell you it was the cruelest thing I have ever done, and that I have hated myself every hour since. I can tell you I would rather have cut off my own hand than say those words where you could hear them. But the why is a door I cannot open yet, because what is behind it puts you in more danger than you are already in. And you are in a very great deal. You keep saying that, she said. Danger. You said it the first night, in this hall, with a shadow at your back. You have said it with your eyes every day since. And every time I ask you to name the thing, you smile and close a door and leave me guarding a house with no idea where the fire is. She took a step toward him, and the bond hummed and strained between them like a rope pulled taut. I have put my body between you and steel twice now. Whatever is coming for you, let me stand in front of it with my eyes open, not blind and grateful and useless. It is not coming for me, he said, so low she almost missed it, and then he shut his mouth, as though he had said far too much, and looked away. She should have pressed. The soldier in her screamed to press. Instead, she crossed the cold floor and stood in front of him and looked up into his ruined, honest face and asked the only question that mattered to the starved thing behind her ribs. Did you mean it? Any of it? Am I ink to you? And Corvin, Alpha King of Caldmore, who had never in his life let anyone see him unguarded, closed his eyes as though it hurt and said, You are the only thing in my kingdom I have ever wanted for no reason but the wanting. You were never the treaty to me. You were the one thing I got that I did not deserve and could not keep. I have loved you since before I had the right to, and I performed not loving you so well that I drove you across the mountains, and it is the great ruin of my life. The bond blew wide, and this time neither of them fought it. She did not decide to kiss him so much as stop being able not to. The distance simply closed, and his hands came up to frame her face the way they had in the yard. But there was no blood this time, and no blades. Only the two of them, and a year of cold coming undone in a single breath. He kissed her like a man coming in out of a storm he had built with his own hands. She kissed him back like she was furious about it, because she was. Because loving him was the least sensible thing she had ever done, and she was going to do it anyway. There was no audience for it. That was the thing she would keep. No court, no envoys, no treaty, no right keeper counting the dawns. Only his hands and his low voice saying her name like it was the one word he knew, and the bond pouring warm and unguarded between them, his wanting and hers tangled past telling which was which. She had been wanted for her blade. She had been wanted for her signature. She had never once in her life stood in the plain, helpless path of a man who simply wanted her, and it undid every locked thing in her. When the gray dawn came, they did not go down to the right. Let them count a dawn missed. Let them count all of them. For the first time since she was 17 years old, Sorrel did not care in the least what the hold saw. She lay a long while afterward with her head on his chest, listening to the great, slow drum of his heart, and let herself have the thing she had never once let herself have in a year of cold Caldmore nights, which was to simply be wanted, and to want back, without measuring what it would cost her. He traced idle shapes on the bare skin of her shoulder and told her small, true things in the dark. That he had noticed her the first hour she arrived in his court, straight-backed and furious in borrowed silk. That the year of courtesy she had mistaken for coldness had been the sound of a coward biting his own tongue, bloody, to keep from saying exactly this. "You are a very stupid man," she informed him, "for a king." "I am," he agreed, into her hair, "the stupidest in the north." It was after, in the thin light, with his heartbeat slowing under her ear, that she felt it. The bond was open. She had his joy, his disbelief, the vast tidal relief of him. But the bond is an honest road, and it runs both ways whether a man wills it or not. And in the far corner of him, behind a door he was holding shut with everything he had left, she felt the thing he had not told her. It was cold, and it was sharp, and it had the shape of a countdown. Something was coming, something with a date on it, and her own name was written all through it. Sorrel lay very still with her cheek on the chest of the man she had just given herself to, listening to that hidden clock tick behind his ribs, and understood that the truth she had waited a year for was not one truth, but two. He loved her. That was real. And he was still, even now, even here, keeping the other half from her. She would find it herself then. She always did. She just did not think, lying warm in the wreck of her own good sense, that she would find it the very next night, with a blade in her hand, standing in the one room in Ostrand that Emmerich kept locked from the whole world. The moon was 3 nights from full, 3 nights from the end of the rite, when the horn sounded again, and this time it was not a king at the gate. It was the river envoy. Sorrel stood at the arrow slit and watched the small, elegant company come up the pass under a banner of wine and old gold, and her whole body went cold because she knew that banner. She had last seen it in the great hall of Caldmore on the worst night of her life, and here it was climbing the road to her home as though it had every right, and at the head of it rode the slender black-haired woman who had laughed while a king called his wife Ink. "What is she doing here?" Sorrel breathed. Behind her, Corvin had gone very still. His voice, when it came, was flat and careful and frightened in a way she had never heard from him. "That," he said, "is the question, and I do not like a single answer I can think of." They watched the company come through the gate together at the narrow slit, and Sorrel felt the fear pouring off him through the open bond, cold and precise. It was not the fear of a man for himself. This was the fear of a man watching 2 halves of a thing he had kept apart slide toward each other, knowing what they made when they met. "We have to leave," he said. "Tonight. You and I. Out the postern. Before the rite is done. I will answer for breaking it. I will answer for anything. Only put the mountains between you and that woman before morning." "I am not running again," Sorrel said. "I ran once on your account and it cost me a year, and most of my pride. If there is a danger under my own roof, I will look it in the face and know its name before I so much as reach for a saddle." She turned from the slit. "And you will tell me tonight what you have been holding behind your teeth since you rode through my gate." Corvin looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face gave way. Some last wall he had been holding. "Tonight," he agreed quietly. "After the hold sleeps." "All of it, Sorrel. Every ugly piece." And then he added, so low she nearly missed it, "I only pray you do not hate me more for the telling than you already have cause to." Emmerich welcomed the envoy like an honored guest. That was the first wrong note. He seated her at the high board, poured her the good wine with his own hand, laughed at her thin jokes, and never once asked the obvious question, which was what a river envoy from a court 300 miles south was doing at the gate of a northern hold in the dead of winter. A regent asks that question. Emmerich did not ask it. Emmerich already knew the answer. Worse than that. Sorrel watched the old man's eyes and the envoy's meet across the board more than once, quick and level and easy. The look of 2 people who had corresponded long before they ever shared a table. Once Vesna lifted her cup a hand's breadth toward Emmerich, and Emmerich answered with the faintest incline of his head, and no one else in that loud hall marked it. Sorrel marked it. She had been trained to mark exactly that, by the very man now trading toasts with the woman who had laughed while a king called her Ink. Sorrel felt the whole year tilt under her. She waited until the hold slept. Then she did the thing she was good at, the thing Emmerich himself had taught her. She moved through her own home like a ghost, and she went looking for the truth in the dark. She found the first piece of it outside the small East Council room, where a line of light lay under the door and 2 voices murmured low behind it. She knew both voices. One was Vesna's, silk laid over a blade. The other was the voice that had sung her to sleep as a child. "The girl has served her purpose," Emmerich was saying. "She came home like a lamb to the very gate. When the southern king rides out at the end of the rite, she rides 1 mile at his side and she does not come back. The road is full of grief for a queen cut down by masterless men. Caldmore and Ostrand go to war over her cold body, and you and I divide what is left of the north between us. It must look like no one's hand at all. Tragedies start no end of useful wars." "You are certain of her," Vesna's voice said. "She was ever a stubborn creature. If she should learn of it." Learn of it, Emmerich said, and Sorrel heard him laugh softly, the warm, low laugh she had loved her whole life. I made that child envoy. I know every door in her, because I built the house. She will do as she is bid to the very end, because she has never once believed she was worth more than the doing. And when she is gone, she will have served the North better than any treaty ever could. Sorrel stood in the dark with her hand pressed to her own mouth and did not breathe. She had thought, an hour ago, that she understood grief. She had been wrong. This was a colder thing than grief. This was the whole foundation of her going out from under her at once, every warm memory she owned, turning in her hands to show the tooling on its underside, the careful, patient hand of a man who had never loved her at all, only shaped her, the way a smith shapes a blade he means one day to throw away. She did not remember deciding to move. One moment she was frozen outside the council room with her whole childhood curdling in her ears, and the next she was halfway across the sleeping hold on legs that were not quite her own, past the banked fires and the snoring watch, going to the one person left she thought she could trust, going to find Corvin. She found him. That was the trouble. She found him exactly where she should not have been able to. The strong room of Ostrin sat behind an iron door in the oldest part of the keep, and only the regent held its key, and Sorrel had never once in her life seen it standing open. It was standing open now. Lamplight spilled out of it across the cold stone, and inside, kneeling before Emmerich's own strongbox with a sheaf of papers fanned in one hand, was the Alpha King of Caldmore. For one wild, joyful heartbeat she thought, he knows, he is proving it. He is on my side. And then she saw what the papers were, and the joy curdled in her throat. They were not Emmerich's ledgers. They were letters, months old, the parchment soft with handling, and she knew the seal on them, because she had seen it 100 times on the maps of Caldmore. They were his. He had carried intercepted letters north in his own saddlebags, letters that named a plot against the Queen's life. And he had said nothing. And she understood in one sick rush that he had known. Before the map room, before the mockery, before any of it, he had known they were hunting her, and he had performed cruelty and driven her across the mountains and followed her into the trap, and never once, not in the yard with her blood on his hands, not in his own bed with the bond wide open, had he simply told her she was in danger. Corvin looked up and went utterly still. Sorrel, he said. How long? She said. Her voice did not sound like her own. How long have you known? Look at me. How long have you known they meant me harm? He did not look away. She would give him that later, when she could bear to give him anything. He knelt in the spilled lamplight with the proof in his hand and did not look away from her. Since before I came to your court, he said. A cipher fell into my hands last autumn, a letter between the river cities and a hand in the north I could not name. It spoke of breaking the alliance by making a widow of me, and it named you. He set the papers down. I only knew that the safest place for you was anywhere the plot did not expect you to be, and that a queen her king had publicly cast off would be worth nothing to anyone wanting to hold her over him. So I made certain you heard me cast you off. I made certain you ran, and I told myself I was saving your life. You drove me here, Sorrel said. To them. To the very hand you could not name. I know, he said, and his voice broke. I did not learn it was Ostrand until I decoded the last of these on the road behind you, and by then, you were through the gate, and all I could do was follow and stand between you and it without letting them see me. I have done it so badly that you hated me the whole year, and I would do it all again the same, because you are alive, and that is the only sum I know how to add. She wanted to strike him. She wanted to fall against him. She did neither. Why did you not simply tell me, she said, in the yard, in your bed, any hour of any day? And here he hesitated, and what he finally said was worse than any lie. Because I did not think you would believe you were worth the saving, he said quietly. I have watched you flinch from every kindness for a year as though it were a trap. Someone taught you, long before I met you, that you were a thing to be spent. A signature. A tool that signs its name and is sent away and does not ask why. And a woman who believes she is worth nothing does not run from a plot against her life. She walks into it with her head down. I could not tell you that you were hunted, because you would not have run. You would have knelt. The floor went out from under her, because it was true. She heard her own voice out of the map room, out of 100 cold Caldmore nights. I am ink. I am the draft under the door. I am useful. Nothing more. And underneath every one of them, older, worn smooth as a stone in a river, was another voice entirely. Little wolf, go south and do your duty and do not make a fuss. A treaty does not weep. A tool does not ask to be loved. Emmerich's voice. It had always been Emmerich's voice. She had carried his hand pressed flat over her own heart her whole life, and called the weight of it her own. He made me small, she whispered, so that I would be easy to spend. She did not get to sit with the horror of it. She never got to sit with anything. The iron door swung wide, and the strong room filled with lamplight and sworn men, and there in the doorway stood Emmerich, and his face was a study in grief so perfect that for one heartbeat even Sorrel almost believed it. There, he said heavily to the men at his back. You see how it is. The Southern King in my strong room in the dead of night, my letters in his hands, my queen at his side. He came north to rob us and carry the girl off to her death and lay it at Ostran's door. Come away from him, child. Tell these good men what he is, and we will keep you safe, as I have always kept you safe. And there it was. The trap sprung clean, and she the jaw of it. He needed her word. She was the wronged queen, the one witness every house would believe. One word, and Corvin condemned for treason, the alliance shattered, the war lit, and Emmerich weeping at the graveside of the child he had spent. He had built the whole machine to run on her obedience. He had built her to run on it. Sorrel looked at the man who had raised her, and she smiled, and it was not a kind smile. You taught me to see a trap, she said. You should have remembered that you taught me too well. She turned to the sworn men, the honest, frightened faces of the hold she had been born in. He says the king cut down 3 of his men, she said, and her voice rang off the old stone. 3 men did fall. They fell in the east yard 9 nights ago with their faces wrapped, putting a knife to my throat in the dark, and every one of them wore the iron of the regent's own oath. She lifted the little token she had carried for 9 nights and let the lamplight catch it. Who among you stamps this iron? Not the king of Caldmore. Him. A murmur went through the men like wind through standing wheat. And he says the king came to carry me to my death, she went on, before Emmerich could speak. But 1 hour ago I stood outside the East Council room and heard the whole shape of it in his own mouth, spoken to the river envoy he has feasted at his table. I ride 1 mile at the right's end and do not come back. Masterless men take the blame, and 2 realms burn over my body while he and his southern friends divide the ash. She looked at Emmerich, and for the first time in her life she was not afraid of him. If the king came to steal me, why do I stand free at his side? And if my own regent came to save me, why does he need me dead by the turn of the moon? The grief slid off Emmerich's face like a mask off a peg, and what was under it was the thing she had felt watching her all month. A man looking at a door he had left unlocked. Take them both, he said to his men, his voice gone flat and cold and true at last. She is distraught. She does not know what she is saying. But the men did not move. They were slow to raise a hand against a regent, slower still against the little wolf they had watched grow up, and in the half-breath of their hesitation, Emmerich understood he had lost the room, and did the last thing, left a cornered man. He drew, and he came for her, because dead she was still a spark for his war, and living she was only the truth. Sorrel had been waiting for it. She had been waiting her whole life for it, she thought, and never known it. She turned into him the way he himself had taught her at 9 years old, furious and too small to fight fair, took the knife arm at the wrist, and used his own weight to put the regent of Ostrand face down on the cold stone, with her knee between his shoulders. She leaned close to his ear, close as he had once leaned to teach her. "Little wolf," she said, "you should have let me grow up." Then the sworn men had him, and it was done. Vesna, clever to the last, had slipped her guard and vanished into the passes before anyone thought to hold her, a reckoning for another day. And then it was only the two of them, Sorrel and the king, alone in the ruin of the truth. "You saved my life," he said. "After everything, you still." "I saved the north," she said, proud of how level she kept it. "You happened to be standing in it." The hope went out of his face slowly, the way a fire dies when no one feeds it. "It began as a way to keep you breathing," he said. "But it stopped being only that so long ago I cannot find the day it changed. I love you. I do not care that it started as a lie. Look at what it became. That is the trouble," she said, and her voice was gentle, which was the cruelest part of it. "My whole life I have been what men decided I would be. Emmerich decided I was a tool. You decided I was a lie you told to keep me safe. Neither of you once decided to simply ask me." She stepped back, and the sealed place behind her ribs screamed at her to stop. "I am glad you are alive. I am glad the North is safe. But I have been spent by clever men who loved me my whole life, and I am done being spent, even gently. Goodbye, Corvin." And she walked out into the gray dawn of her freedom and did not let herself look back, because she knew that if she looked back, she would not be able to do it. Sorrel ruled Ostrand through the hardest winter in living memory, and she was good at it. She had always known, somewhere under Emmerich's careful hand, that she would be. The regency was hers by right, and by the plain will of a hold that had watched her take its traitor down in his own strong room. She cut the rot out of the guard name by name. She opened the granary Emmerich had bled, found it emptier even than Corvin had guessed, and filled it again by spring. Slowly, the hold that had once called a frightened girl the Snow Bride learned instead to call a hard, just woman my lady, and to mean it. She was disciplined about not thinking of Caldmore. She thought of it only in the gray hour before dawn, when the bond she had never managed to seal shut again, lay warm and patient behind her ribs, carrying the far, faint weather of him across all those miles. She had stopped trying to close it. Closing it had nearly killed her the first time, and besides, she did not want it closed. She wanted the one honest thing she had left, even if it only ever reached her as distant weather. Corvin did not write her letters. She had half expected letters, and there were none, and she told herself she was relieved. What came instead, 3 weeks after she took the high seat, was a rider under a black banner bearing a single sealed document, and when Sorrel broke the seal and read it, she had to sit down. It was the treaty. The old pact that had bought her at 17 and sold her south, the one her whole life had been spent sealing. And across its face, in the king's own hand, was written that Caldmore released Ostrand from every term and every claim, in perpetuity, asking nothing in return. No bride, no bond, no tribute, no alliance owed. Ostrand was free, wholly and forever, of the treaty that had made her a signature. He had dissolved the very thing he had married. There was a line beneath it, in the same hand, smaller. Now there is nothing between us but you and me. If you never come, that is just. But I could not bear for you to stay away because a piece of paper once made you feel owned. You were never owed to me, Sorrel. You were only ever wanted. The paper is ash. The wanting is not. She read it more times than she would ever admit. She put the document in the strong room where Emmerich's letters had been, and she went back to ruling her free hold. And she did not answer it, because she did not know how to answer a man who had just handed her the one thing no one had ever given her, which was the freedom to choose him. It might have ended there, 2 free realms and a sealed bond neither would ever speak of. If the spring had not brought the northern summit, held of all the cold ironies at Caldmore. Sorrel could have refused to go, but Ostrand had real business at that table, and she had sworn never again to let clever men decide her hold's fate in rooms she was too proud to enter. So she went. She rode back through the eastern gate she had fled a year before, in her own colors this time, at the head of her own men, and no one in Caldmore called her the Snow Bride now. They did not quite know what to call her. She found she liked that. She managed 3 days without being alone with him. On the third night she failed. She was crossing the cold corridor behind the great hall, the very corridor, and there was the map room, its door open a hand's width, lamplight falling gold across the flagstones exactly as it had on the night that broke her life in two. And Corvin's voice was inside it, low, unguarded, speaking to someone. Sorrel stopped. She had learned once what listening at that door could cost. But then she heard her own name, and the shape of it was not wrong this time. It was the exact opposite of wrong. The counselor's voice came first, dry and reasonable. "The northern lady will not have you, Majesty. A year she has let you dangle. Ostrand is free and needs nothing from us now. There are 3 good matches within a week's ride that would seal the West, and a king cannot mourn a treaty forever." There was a silence. Sorrel, frozen at the door, heard the fire pop. "It was never only a treaty," Corvin said. "Majesty, you want the truth of it, old friend, so here it is. And then, you will let it lie. I married a woman to seal a pact, and fell in love with her the way a stone falls down a well, all at once, and all the way to the bottom. And I was too much a coward and too much a king to tell her, and by the time I understood that keeping her alive and keeping her mine were not the same thing, I had broken both." He gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "I have exactly one wife in this life, a free queen in the north who owes me nothing and does not want me, and I would sooner rule alone until I die than stand in a warm room and call some other woman ink because it is politic. I did that once. It is the one thing I have done that I cannot undo." Another silence, then the counselor, quieter. "Does she know you feel so?" "No," said Corvin, "and she never will, because the last gift I have left to give her is not to weigh her down with it. She has been wanted at, all her life, by men who called it love. I will not do it to her from across a mountain range for the rest of hers." And Sorrel, standing at the door exactly as she had a year before, understood that she was hearing the very thing the mockery had been built to hide, spoken now with no one to perform it for. Just a man alone in a lamplit room, telling an old friend the truth he meant to carry to his grave, because he had decided silence was the kindest thing he had left to give her. A year ago, she had backed away from this door in the dark and run all the way to the mountains. She had built a whole new life out of the running. She did not run this time. She pushed the map room door open, and the lamplight fell on her, and Corvin came to his feet so fast his chair went over. The old counselor took one look at the two of them and found urgent business elsewhere with a speed that would have been comic on any other night. "Sorrel," Corvin said, "how long were you?" "Long enough," she said. Her heart slammed the way it had in the yard with the blades coming. "Long enough to hear you decide, by yourself, in a room I was not standing in, what I did and did not need to know." Again. She crossed the floor to him. "You dissolved the treaty so I would be free to choose, and then you stood in here and chose for me, that I was better off never knowing you still loved me. You cannot do both, Corvin. Pick one." His mouth opened. Nothing came out. She had, she realized with a fierce private joy, finally rendered the Alpha King of Caldmore entirely speechless, so she made it simple for him. She reached behind her own ribs, to the sealed place she had guarded for a year, the bond she had drowned with her own hands on the worst night of her life, and did the one thing she had sworn she would never do again. She opened it. She threw it wide, on purpose, with her whole will, the deliberate opposite of the night she had closed it to run from him. It rushed between them all at once, both ways together, her wanting and his crashing with a force that rocked them where they stood. A year of held breath let go, and Corvin made a sound like a man struck through the heart by the last thing he ever expected to survive. "You are opening it," he said, ragged. "You closed it. You closed it to be free of me." "I did," she said. "And now I am free, and I am opening it anyway, and that is the whole difference, you impossible man. Nobody sent me into this room. Nobody sent me. I read your paper until I knew it by heart, ruled a hold through a winter, and crossed the mountains of my own free will, and I am standing in the one doorway that ever broke my heart, choosing you. Not the treaty, not the bond. You. Now for once in your life, stop deciding what I can bear and kiss me." He kissed her. There was no audience for it. She would keep that. Always. No court, no envoys, no treaty, no clever men counting what it was worth. Just the two of them in a lamplit doorway with the bond blown wide and singing, a year of cold undone, and the map room that had ended everything quietly becoming the room that began it all over again. When at last he drew back, he pressed his forehead to hers and she felt him shaking, and through the open bond she felt the thing he could not say breaking over him in waves. "Say it out loud," she told him. "To my face this time, where I can hear it and you cannot take it back." "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since before I had the right. You were never ink, Sorrel. You were the whole letter. You always were." "Good," she said unsteadily. And then, because she was still herself and always would be, "Now, about that treaty you tore up without asking me." Corvin started to laugh. In the end, they wrote a new pact, not a treaty. Sorrel was very firm about that. Treaties bought people, and she had been bought once and did not care to be filed under the same word twice. What they wrote instead was smaller and far more binding. Two free sovereigns of two free realms setting their names to a single line that owed nothing to any council in the world. It sealed no alliance, no border, not a single sack of grain. It sealed only the two of them, by choice, for no reason but the choosing. They held the binding at Ostrand, because Sorrel would be wed in her own mountains or not at all, and the whole hard north came out into the snow for it, the hold that had once whispered Snowbride now roaring her name until the old stones rang. Marin wept. Corvin wept, which surprised no one, least of all Sorrel. She very nearly did not. And then the bond gave her away entirely, wide open and honest between them for the whole world to feel, and she let the North watch its lady weep with joy for once in her life. "You are stuck with me now," he murmured when it was done. "No dissolving this one. There is no paper left to tear." "Why would I tear it?" she said. "I am the one who proposed it. If you will recall, I have made rather a habit of choosing you in doorways. Best thing you ever overheard," he said. She kissed him, and for once, she did not argue. If a person wished to be strictly fair about the whole matter, and Sorrel, ruling warm and loved in the country that had made her, had long since decided that a person did, then the entire ruin and the entire mending of her life belonged to one lazy, cruel, clever man, and to the single night he was careless enough to let her hear the truth through a door. She had left a kingdom over it. She had come home to a marriage over it. And she would not, given 100 years and every choice to make again, have changed one frozen mile of the road between.